I read that by 16 years old, you were the best in the world.
I had this run of success in my late teens that was, I thought, unparalleled. And then I'm driving home with ice on both ankles, with a car full of skaters. And in that moment, I thought, I can't keep doing it this way. The trajectory just seemed like it was never going to end. And then it dropped very quickly.
You know, they say if you want to master something, you've got to do 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
Sounds like you did a lot of hours at that very.
I mean, at some point, I was probably doing just one trick 10,000 times.
We say all of this. You know, you said later in my pro career, and then you said you were 16.
Yeah. Well, I've had a pretty lengthy pro career, but I would say that around age 16 is when I started to come into my own and was able to shut down any of the pushback or the haters, so to speak, because they were all saying, "Oh, he's only good at his home park," or he only does these goofy little tricks. And at some point, it was like, you can't really deny that I'm doing these tricks in the most difficult circumstances and consistently. And so I had this run of success in my late teens that was, I thought, unparalleled. I mean, in terms of suddenly I was making income. I owned a house when I was still in my last year of high school from my earnings, and the trajectory just seemed like it was never going to end. And then it dropped very quickly in the early 90s. And then I had a good 3 or 4 years that were very slow, and touch and go in terms of trying to make a living, provide for a family. And then things kind of came back around in the late 90s. So when I say early late in my career, there's a few stages of that.
And that first stage is from 16 to
about 23.
23.
Yeah.
And at that point, I read that by 16 years old, you were the best in the world. You were widely renowned.
I was ranked number one for a while. Yeah. And it's tricky though. I mean, I don't like saying that, just because skating is subjective and it's apples to oranges. So who's the best? That's all in the eyes of the beholder. I did well in competition. I got good scores and I had a good run.
I mean, I think you're slightly underplaying that, because I was reading through some stats, and I read that 16, you were widely regarded as the best skateboarder in the world. And by 25, you'd won 73 of the 103 professional contests you'd entered, finishing in second place a further 19 times, which is, for me, pretty freakish.
Like I said, I had a good run, but also it's a specific style. So I was skating pools and half pipes. And then in the early 90s, street skating came into its own. And what you see today with people jumping downstairs on handrails, ledges, and things like that was just starting to blossom. And I realized pretty early on that was not my strength, and that my ratio of success to injury was much higher doing that. So I kind of gave it up. I was in it for a while. I was skating some of the competitions, and I was doing a lot of tours and things. And then at one point I was driving home from a tour. I had sprained one ankle almost to the point of breaking it, but somehow didn't. And then in the process of nursing that one, I was still skating because we were on tour. I rolled the other ankle trying to save this ankle. And then I'm driving home with ice on both ankles, with a car full of skaters. And in that moment, I thought, I can't keep doing it this way. Like this is not sustainable. I'm not going to be able to be a pro skater much longer if I think I'm going to do this type of skating. And so I'm going to stick with more of the half pipe, which is what I know. Even though that wasn't the popular way of skating, I just knew that if I wanted to keep skating into my adult life, I was going to have to stick with my expertise.
And I'm right in thinking, from what you've said there, that your skating career started to really take off, 15, 16, kind of peaks at one point at around that 23-ish age.
I would say around 21, 22 is when it started to peak, yeah.
And at what point in that journey did you think, I'm going to skate professionally for the rest of my life? Was there a point where you go, this is my job now? You never?
No. In fact, when I was 24 is when I started my company Birdhouse, and I honestly thought starting a company was my way of sort of bowing out of the spotlight and not being a so-called professional skater, because there was very little opportunity for me as a half pipe or vert skater to be doing anything. And I was trying to nurture a group of skaters that were mostly street and trying to give them new opportunities and trying to have them promote our company as well. So I thought that I was curating a team and that I was going to be sort of the ringleader of it, but not be considered a pro myself. I never quit skating though. That was just in my blood. And so at some point, a few years later, things started to pick up again. The X Games happened. They had a half pipe contest, and I was still on top of my game. So after that, I started to compete a lot more because the interest grew, and then I was winning a lot of events.
We don't often think it's possible for a sport to kind of experience a downturn. Right. A commercial downturn, like thinking about the big sports of today, the NBA, basketball, whatever it be, the thought that it could kind of have an economic downturn and put the athletes out of business for a while is kind of inconceivable for me. So
I mean, most of my peers quit
in the 1990s because
or quit or not. I can't say quit. Most of them found jobs.
Because so what had happened in the skating industry, the commercial side of the business?
There was a few things. I think that skating had gone through cycles in the past. In the late 70s, skating was the new fad. It was like especially in the US, it was like the yo-yo. Mm-hmm. And it's the new toy, and it's a transportation, and you can do all these things. And then that fad kind of faded out. And then in the 80s, it became this thing because we were skating the empty pools, and there was this attitude and the music and the hairdos and the graphics. And then and Back to the Future. Mm. And so that was another spike in popularity. And a lot of skate parks were opening in those days. And I think in the late 80s, the liability became too much for these skate facilities, and they just started closing very quickly. I mean, there was just a toppling of skate parks through, I would say, 89 to 91. And then there was no place to do it because there were no public parks. All these facilities are private. There were a few, but they were not good. And so all these private parks were closing shop, and then we had, as skaters, had nowhere to go. So that's when skating took to the underground and became more street centric.
Your dad was working in the industry as well around this time?
He was in the 80s, yeah. He helped to form the National Skateboard Association, which sanctioned most of the events through those years.
How did he get into skateboarding?
Just he saw me and he saw how much I loved it, and he saw a serious lack of organization. And he was always very supportive of his kids. I mean, my brother was a surfer. He would drive him to the beach at dawn to get the good waves. My sister was in a band. He would be the roadie for the band and drive all their gear to the gigs. So when I started skating, he was all in on supporting it, but he saw that it was just sort of chaos. There was very little organization. There were very few events, and he saw a group of kids like me that loved it and had very little support.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.